Hello everyone, my name is Stephen Drew and we're back with a special podcast all around the globe, and I'm privileged because one of the guests in particular has turned off their aircon just to record this so that it sounds crystal clear for yourself. And I am joined by the fantastic and fabulous Jake and Erin from Out of Architecture, who I discovered online, and I'm sure by the end of this, depending on how the podcast goes, oh, my screen's going already. Depending on how this all goes, maybe we'll become fast friends. So Jake and Erin from Out of Architecture, how are you? You okay?
We're doing really well, Stephen. Thanks so much for having us.
Doing really great.
Right.
Already getting warm, but doing really
You're getting warm. I already touched my camera, Jake, isn't it? It's just I'll have to work on that after this, but we're gonna keep on going anyways. So for Jake and Erin, basically, some people might not be aware of the awesome stuff that you do, and perhaps Jake, we can start with yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then Erin afterwards? That would be awesome if you could tell us about yourself as well.
Absolutely. Sure. So Erin and I are the co-founders of a project turned business turned now sort of crazy passion called Out of Architecture, which is a career consulting company that supports individuals from design and architecture backgrounds in finding jobs that we all thought we were going to be getting when we left architecture school, and in finding roles that kind of fulfill and satisfy all of those creative urges and values, and whether it's compensation or appreciation or creativity. In my day job, I am a senior manager at Adidas, and I work in digital technologies team doing computational design, 3D modeling, visualization, rendering for shoes, which are essentially little buildings that you stick feet in. I mean, it's really the same thing. And so beyond that, we do a lot of different projects. Erin and I both have some other passions, and so it's kind of a myriad of things, but that's a little bit about me.
Well done. I mean, just before we jump in, Erin, I got a confession for you guys, Jake. I think you're gonna log off. Look at this, because you should see. I need new shoes. Look at these bad boys. They're terrible. Jake, you gotta sort me out with some proper shoe advice after this. Yeah, it's embarrassing. We were talking earlier about, Maiwa is now the RIBA president. I rocked up with these horrible trainers. So maybe we'll pick that up later.
Okay.
Maybe we'll pick that up later.
Sounds like a plan.
I'm gonna give you a clap, and maybe you can help me design some new shoes after this. Erin, sorry, I hijacked your intro with my awful confession about my terrible old Converses.
No, it's okay.
I'd love to hear about yourself.
Actually, I guess also wearing Converses.
We haven't. Oh yeah, but yours are nice. Like mine are like dying a death. They've given up on life,
That's the great part about Converses, right? Actually, I just went to go buy a new pair, and I remember when they were like $25.
Yeah,
I just dropped like $65 on a pair of Chucks. But anyway, I've been buying Converse my whole life. I guess the first thing you should know about me is I was in a punk band. So, no, not at all. So, I mean, I was, but that's not what I do now, unfortunately.
What do you do now then?
So
punk band's pretty cool,
It is, and we try to revive it every once in a while. I have music on the brain because I went to a Rage Against the Machine concert last night, so I'm still pretty stoked.
Did you?
I did.
Oh my god. I do like Rage.
Yeah, it was fantastic. But no, so I mean, I do aside from the partnership with Jake and Out of Architecture, which, as he kind of appropriately mentioned, started as a sort of passion project that became a business, and now, as we grow, has been able to become really the best version of both. So we're pretty excited about that. I am also still an architect, trying to redefine what that term means. So I run my own firm called Matter. Where we try to do as much as possible community engaged design. Right now, working on a project with a couple of cities in New Jersey, making homes for the unhoused, as well as a bunch of kind of bespoke custom stuff in places like Martha's Vineyard. One hand kind of washes the other in that sense. So I get to play around with all the things I love to do in architecture school, which was build and, mess around in 3D and get people excited about building homes.
I love it. Well, I'll give you a clap as well. And well done, Erin. So you're still doing architecture in the traditional sense, but you've kind of got that
Not in the traditional
rocks.
sense.
Oh, that's true.
Doing
I
everything
meant,
to not be
I meant careers like, but are you more like then Bat Lady, is it? So you're doing a bit of like architecture for the community in the day, and then at night you're doing out of architecture and somehow managing to go and see Rage Against the Machine and somehow managing to do a bit of punk. I'm impressed.
That's the beauty of getting to, run a business as managing your own time. I mean, oh my gosh, can we just talk about how inefficient it was to sit in, a traditional firm and kind of have your drawings done and feel like, well, it's 3:30. How long do I need to pretend that, I'm actually working before it's safe to get up and go out to dinner before I actually come back to the firm to make sure that I don't need to do anything else before I leave again. Or you're waiting for someone else to send you a detail so that you can actually put the model together. And, it just takes hours and hours of waiting. I mean, that's the beauty of having, either a company or teams or running your own company that supports doing a myriad number of things. I mean, it feels great to have that flexibility. And I'm sure, Stephen, that you feel that as well. But yeah, then that's how you get to see Rage Against the Machine,
I love it. Do you reckon there's some poor soul out there listening to this podcast while rendering stuff late at night, and we're talking about how we're not doing that?
I'm sure there are many. And you're only a poor soul if it's not where you want to be. Right. And I think that's what we try to tell people is it's really important to understand that, I think for a long time, we thought we were the villains of the story of like stealing people from architecture, smart, talented, good architects who, are just escaping to tech to make more money. And I got that so many times in the transition to working in footwear. Well, you're never going to come back. You're just going to become greedy. It's all about money. But I never got to do the kind of innovative manufacturing fabrication stuff that I get to do at Adidas in an architecture firm. I just never had that opportunity. And, even if the pay was level, which it certainly is not, and I think that's a huge part of feeling valued. I would prefer the work that I'm doing over the work that I was being given in architecture. So I don't think you should, not everyone who's doing a rendering right now or sitting down and working through Revit detail or a family is going to hate that work. They might love that. And that's incredible. But there's a lot of people who get trained to do other things and expect to be going into the profession, not rendering, not necessarily working in Revit only. And that's where I think we come in.
Nice. Well, I've got a confession because I used to do architecture and I haven't done it for 8 years. I've been doing recruitment. I went to a recruiter when I was a Part 2 architecture assistant after doing 5 years in the UK, and I was like, I'm just not feeling it. I'm not too sure what I should do. And they were like, yeah, you're good at talking. Why don't you give this a go? And I was like, honestly, I'll just give it a go at this point. And I've done it ever since. So I have left architecture in the traditional sense as well. But recruitment, I mean, that's probably like, all the evils on the spectrum. I think sales and estate agents and recruiters are normally the thing that when you go to a dinner party, right, Jake and Erin, people are like, oh, you do recruitment. Oh, and I at first had to kind of get over that. And I think it's still been the best job I've ever done. Sometimes I work though crazy hours. I gotta say, I run my own business now, and I think I work more hours than I did when I was in architecture in a weird way. but I'm not clock watching anymore, and that's the big difference. And that's probably my own personal demons, which comes from architecture, I think, as well, where there's this attitude in architecture education, especially in the UK. You tell me if it's the same, in the States, is where basically you can work long hours into the night and all this crazy stuff. And I think that sometimes I struggle with work-life balance on a personal level, which is very interesting because when you can blame architecture for that, but then also now in this new situation, I've got to stop doing it myself. But the good news is, guys, I've got better at it. I don't do so many long hours anymore. My partner will throw a frying pan at my head if I work too long, hours into the evening. Steve, what are you doing all the time? Come on, you have to stop. You have to put down the computer, just close everything, right? So,
No, it's
so
it's true. Like we have this. I think we have the same issue here, and I'm with you. I at this point, I guess I run two businesses, and yeah, I work much harder than I did or I would if I worked for somebody else. But you're right. There's this difference between what
yeah,
you really enjoy doing, and I think clock watching is the best way to put it. Right.
yeah,
You
100%.
know, we had a bunch of pieces of furniture we were working on last week, and I love making things, and it was 100 degrees outside, but we were outside. I was outside all day on my birthday, like building a table, and I was just like, you know what, this is exactly how I would want to spend that. Maybe with 10
Yeah,
degrees cooler or 20 degrees cooler, but aside from that, I mean, having the freedom to exercise whatever your passions are kind of on your own terms or as much as on your own terms as possible, to me, that's everything, right? And it's kind of,
yeah.
that's not necessarily money. I think the most important currency is time, and being able to decide how you spend your time, and design your life around that is really key.
I agree, and I'll jump in. And I'm loving this conversation because it's close to home for me. Because again, going back to recruitment, you think sales is all about chasing the money and all this stuff, and what I learned is that it was quite an interesting space because there's no real rules in it, right?
Mm.
And so, I mean, partly the architecture social came out of giving information, helping people out, experimenting with career counseling, made a forum during the pandemic, all this cool stuff. And that's because there was nothing in this space. So ironically, I've had much more scope to do innovation in the recruitment industry than if I was staying in an architecture practice. And I'm like you, I used to like volunteer to take the bins out in the office because I was like 5 minutes away from my desk would be better. And then I learned as well, and this is not good advice for anyone out there, but I had one or two key directors who would like to talk like me, and then I learned quite quickly if I asked them about their family or their situation in the kitchens, I would just procrastinate and not return to my desk for 20 minutes. Hey, Richard, how's your daughter doing at uni? Is it going well with economics? Oh, Steve, no. And I would do that. And at one point, they used to chase me, Jake and Erin. They used to chase me because there was 3 kitchens where I used to work. And I would always be in the other kitchens. Ironically, though, while I was that kind of part 2 architectural assistant, and they're like, Steve's a nice guy, but we're not too sure about that. In terms of recruitment, I've done all of their recruitment. And so, it doesn't mean that you're not good in some skills. And I think that maybe that's a good segue to the next thing about architecture, because I think it's an amazing qualification. I love studying architecture, and I apply a lot of it to business now. But you're right. I think, like, for me, it was really anticlimactic going into the architecture industry because me personally, some people I know, they had it right. They were loving it. They were doing all the law degree. In the UK, it's called Part 3 to become qualified as an architect. I'm sure you have like an AIA equivalent and all that. And they were loving it. And for me, I was not interested, right? But then I got like a really good grade at university. And I remember feeling at the time like, I don't think I'm stupid, but I'm not too sure where I want to do. And I wasn't quite sure. And actually, you're talking about being outside of architecture. I didn't know many people that did that. And if I said to anyone at the time, like, I'm not too sure if I want to continue becoming an architect, it was like, really? Why? After all these years, are you not, what's going on? Is something wrong with your brain? Are you a failure? Are you just not good enough? And so I felt like that, and I didn't feel like I had anyone to speak to at the time. And I'll throw out this question to you both. Is this a similar thing that you're hearing now? And maybe that's why, again, you wanted to set up out of architecture. So was it just not me? Am I not the only black sheep out there?
It's definitely not just you. We have, I mean, at this point, we're somewhere over the range of about 700 clients and several thousand conversations. It's astonishing how much the expectations are shifting, I think, for students. I mean, and certainly, you know, a decade ago, I think it was a lot more taboo to go into a degree and say, well, I'm going to use this for some ulterior motive, right? Some alternate pathway. But now I think in just the almost 5 years that we've been working out of architecture, we've had so many individuals come to us and say, hey, I'm in the middle of school and I'm well aware that I don't want to go into architecture as it is traditionally practiced through a firm. Tell me about the alternatives. And what that highlights for me is that we're getting away from this issue of what Erin and I have termed kind of the noun crisis, which is you start architecture school to become an architect, period. And the architectural career pathway is defined around that term. You have nuances to that, whether it's architectural designer, architectural assistant, you know, you have an associate architect, a project architect, a principal architect, a partner, but all of these things are in essence one career trajectory. Right. And when you step out of just that narrative, you start to see that there are other pathways. I mean, there are spec writers who were architects. There are also engineers who are architects. There are model builders. There are computational designers. There are marketers who came from architecture, salespeople who came from architecture. There are so many pathways. And we've started to encounter some of these people who have a law degree and an architectural degree and are in these very strange niche areas of architecture, engineering, and construction. And what we try to do is to show people first, beyond just that tiny bubble of I am an architect, here are some other things. But we've started to expand that more and more. And really what out of architecture points to is that there are architects in the world beyond AEC. There are retail designers, workplace designers, service designers, experiential designers, UX designers, all of these different designers that can benefit from the architectural training and that can use that to their advantage in an industry and a creative application that maybe is just not buildings. And that is such a powerful thing to have going through your education, to understand that I have a way out, because as with any other relationship, even if you're, let's say, dating someone, putting that person against all of the other opportunities, the possibilities, that's how you know, is this the right person for me? Is this the right role for me? If you think that you have only one option, especially in a career, you're just, you know, you're going to take whatever is put in front of you. And we see architects do that with salary, with work, with, you know, the criteria of however many hours they're taking on, and not thinking twice about it, even if it feels horrendous, because they just think they have no alternative.
Yeah, not an ideal situation. And I remember feeling that way as well, of not too sure what to do. But there was just something in me that I didn't want to do the architectural exam, because it was getting real then, Erin. You know, it was like, if I do the exam, that's really a commitment. And actually, I almost felt it would be fraudulent to my passions to study the legalities of architecture when I didn't really intend to practice it. But ironically, the way I look at doing my own business, a lot of that I see from my masters and part twos, and that data-driven approach. Because we mentioned even just before we started the podcast, is how I found out of architecture is because I found a backlink, which is the technical term for your website linking to my website. And that's a skill I never learned before, of running my own business. And, you know, and again, while I set up the architecture in 2018, it's weird how the world works, because for years I was dabbling with WordPress, and there was a few other things, and learning a little bit of CSS. I mean, I have a friend that is a technically, you know, an architectural assistant, and as you guys mentioned earlier, who's now a UX designer, and he's done that for a long period of time. But actually, it's weird how the world works, as in, for me, playing around with websites. That's also been one of my huge strengths, because in recruitment, if you've ever seen Wolf of Wall Street, it's not quite as bad as that, but it is a bit like that in recruitment. And they were like, hey, you over there, you're like that clever architecture guy, apparently, and you know websites. Can you just build something? So I built something half decent, and they're like, whoa. And then it was that kind of thing of that skill set or that approach in architecture in recruitment. It was really valuable. And actually, the other thing, sorry, I'm rambling on, so I need 1 second. But looking at the process of recruitment, much like a BIM manager or something looks at architecture, and that the process of it was extremely valuable, because getting into the science of something, and it was that approach that I picked up in my studies, was super valuable in another industry. So, I mean, I love all that stuff. And maybe a quick other thing to mention, because we talked about my website, we're going to your website, and I found your website, and I loved it, because you've got right now, you've got a job board, and you mentioned all these opportunities that maybe architects would be good for. And I thought that was amazing, because I can imagine when you're in architecture, for you guys, you could be like, right, maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that. It's very hard, isn't it, when you're still in the role, to imagine anything other than what you're doing, because where do you begin? And as you quite rightly said, maybe there's a role, and you mentioned Rockstar, and I loved Grand Theft Auto, and I know there's environmental designers there. So that's maybe one that I thought of a bit. But even then, they don't necessarily say in these adverts, right, open to an architectural professional. It's kind of, you have to, I would imagine, and to explain to the employer or show transferable skills. So I don't know. I mean, Erin, do you want to jump on that as well? Is that right? Do you find that you have to guide people on how to apply to these roles so that the people see their transferable skills?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack in what you're talking about. And part of it comes from, if we don't rebel against this really narrow understanding of what an architect is and does, we're just not keeping up with progress, right? I mean, when we were all born, half of the jobs that probably our colleagues who are not architects have didn't exist as titles, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you that I know that for a fact when I was born that, you know, a technical data scientist or an information architect, I don't think those roles didn't exist yet. They maybe did in niche sort of government agencies. But so the reality is why do we not focus on this disconnect between all of the skills that you're getting through a degree of study, happen to be called architecture, but there are some data scientists out there also that have a background in English literature, I'm sure. Right? So it's just because your degree program is titled this, and maybe even your first few jobs out of school, this sort of immediate or all-consuming association with, no, I build buildings, really sort of cuts you off at the knees. Because to get to your direct question, so let's say you don't find someone at Rockstar who knows an architect or knows what an architect does or was an architect at some point. That's an incredible opportunity to explain the way an architect thinks. Right? What you were trained to do. What were you trained to do? You were trained to mitigate uncertainty. You were trained to manage complex systems without having an intensely deep, you know, knowledge or expertise or skill set in that complex system. You're trained to make something out of nothing. You're trained to manage uncertainty and risk around, you know, following a process. You're trained to manage yourself and your time in a series of really complex scheduling processes and other people, right? So these are all incredibly useful skills that no one knows an architect necessarily has, just like I don't know what the skills of a data scientist actually are, right? But if you kind of separate yourself from that title, or at least allow yourself to take some ownership and explain that to people, and maybe even to yourself, and recognize that your skills are applicable in all these other places, it ends up making, if we don't do that, it ends up making architecture a really sort of narrow, dismal world that only makes buildings.
Well said. Jake, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that was exceptionally well put.
I think so.
I agree that I agree, and I would only add that, you know, we talk a lot about the negatives of architecture. But to Erin's point, there is an incredible opportunity in the architectural profession. And we, for the longest time, felt that we were going to stay and fight and do something to change that. And in a recent episode that you recorded, you had mentioned that, with along with a colleague, I forget her name, but she was a fantastic guest, that there is power in separating yourself from the system and then turning around and trying to support from the outside, I think, and giving yourself some breathing room and time to focus on that is incredibly important. And for anyone listening to this who might have their, head buried in a 3D model or a rendering or feel lost, there is no shame in stepping away from, a particular position to look at architecture from a different lens.
Yeah.
I mean, that is an incredible opportunity to broaden the profession, to redefine what architecture means, both to you and to others. And I'm constantly shocked at the notes, the messages, the responses that Erin and I get of people thanking us just for showing them that architecture can be something else. I do often still feel a lot of guilt when we talk to firm leaders and owners and principals, because I think that they maintain this pay your dues mentality, having to stay, having to suffer as being a part of the badge of honor of architecture. And yet Erin and I also have architecture firms now coming to us to ask for talent as kind of almost recruiters in a sense, because they're interested in people who think differently, who don't want to have to suffer, who are interested in exploring a multitude of things at a young career stage. And that's amazing. So to me, that's a huge win and a small change in what seemed to be a very unified wall of the architectural profession.
Well said. Because I think it's interesting that I think at the time, and I'm lucky because my dad was a really good support, and my mum. But it's interesting because my dad, he was an engineer, and between us, right, and he still is an engineer, but he was an engineer in a particular place, and he hated the job, right? He hated it. And he was working in the factory at the time, and you could just smoke there. So he was at this machine smoking all day. And any first chance he got, he switched to a role where he was like a relationship builder in engineering. So when I was like, Dad, I don't want to be an architect, and a lot of, ironically, my friends in architecture were more like, you're crazy, Steve. What are you going to do? Just put up with it for another 2 years. You'll change your mind. It was my dad, of all people. It was like, yeah, okay, I understand. Just do what you want. And because, it was quite scary at the time. So I do think having that support is important. And I think it's really important that we have people like yourself taking the taboo out of it. So I'm going to give you a quick clap, a great clap for that, because we need more of that. What I was going to add is that, okay, so in terms of, I'm going to bring it to myself as well, because I can speak from experience because of what I've done. So while I recruit in architectural recruitment, I think I've made a much more of a positive impact on the architecture industry than if I was continuing down that trajectory as a Part 2 architectural assistant. And that's where I think it's really interesting going against the status quo. Because, and look, I know I've got a friend that actually struggled during university, whereas I was okay. I was all right. I have a friend who struggled, and now he's like an associate director, building buildings which are amazing that I could never have done. And I've left the industry. I didn't do my Part 3 architecture. But where I'm going is that I think that you can be still involved in architecture, or even set up your own business and do all this stuff, which is outside maybe the status quo, but you can still help in the built environment. So, for example, you guys must be doing this, and surely you get your kicks off as well, because that's where we came from, right? That's our origins, and it is nice to be adding something back. And I know people that have gone into maybe architecture journalism, or another emerging space I see, and you mentioned tech before, is also, it's quite a lot of tech in the BIM space or the modular space, and there's developers in modular, and you got parametric designers. And I know one architectural assistant who's got a job, a while ago at Google. I don't even know what he's doing at the moment. I met up for him and he was like, yeah. You can, because I'm in recruitment, he'd be like, yeah, if you got a job for around 90,000, I'll look at it. And I was like, I haven't got any jobs in architecture at that level. And so he's probably, off there with Google making the next, but he was doing like AR, VR and metaverse stuff before it was probably now called metaverse. Point is, I'm trying to get to, you can add a lot of value indirectly in architecture. So while out of architecture, I'd love to hear stories. Do you know any kind of cool stuff that's, like you mentioned, architecture practices asking for people's talents coming in? Have you seen architects that have gone off and maybe set up their own businesses and doing cool stuff in the architecture industry inadvertently?
I mean, we have the privilege of talking to people who go off and do just absolutely amazingly cool things. And sometimes we get to help them do that, or sometimes they just come to us and say, like, hey, I really resonate with what you're trying to do. Here's my story, right? So it's amazing that we get that. I think it comes back to this question of how do you want to have agency in the world? One of our clients is now designing bases for SpaceX, right? So places to launch rockets from.
Oh, wow.
Like that's amazing. We've had clients go off and be yacht designers. We've had clients who've wanted to focus on sustainability, but from a corporate perspective. So going in and being a strategist or a consultant who helps companies with strategy, or an in-house sustainability consultant for companies that, obviously, hopefully care about the built environment, right? And again, it comes back to, like, what are your personal values and how do they align with the agency you want to have in the world? And I think the fact that it can turn back on itself and we can help modernize or help bring create more equity in the profession and expand the bounds of it so that these things aren't so architecturally adjacent, but rather there's just sort of powers of 10 as to the agency that you can have. That to me is success. I got an email the other day from a former student of mine who did her thesis on women's health access in rural Turkey. And she sent me a photo from her white coat ceremony because she did a ton of research for that, did a lot of boots on the ground, working with people, working with healthcare providers, and decided to go become a doctor so that she could merge her thinking both from an architectural access, built environment standpoint, and now from, a med school standpoint. And to me, that's like one of the best examples of that, to say that, you know what? Yeah, I can wear the hat of an architect. Cool. But I'm also going to wear this other hat because when I put both of them on, synapses fire, and that's the type of agency she wants to have in the world. And to me, that's amazing. And if more people did that, as it aligned with their passions, we would there's no telling where we would end up even as a society.
Nice. I was thinking while we talk, and that's really useful to know. And I'm glad you're hearing that. So, well, it's good that out of architecture exists now. Before that, there was nothing there. So I appreciate you've set this up. Now, I dabble and still do a little bit, not as much as I'd like, because I'm busy doing recruitment, busy setting up my business, and it can be a lot. But last year, I did in particular a lot of career coaching, and I found it deeply rewarding and incredibly intensive, though. So first of all, round of applause for doing it. And now, and I do want to say as well, what I've learned as well, and I'm going to quickly add it, is that I think, especially from architecture culture, we can do a lot of work for free. And I always challenge people on the perception of free. And I know that while I give away some information that I can free, that tends to be like a podcast like this, because you can share value to a bigger network, I guess, or an audience. The reality is, one-on-one coaching is very specific to different people, and you do that as well. So let's not give away any juicy nuggets. And it's not like you got juicy nuggets to give, because everyone's on a one-on-one basis. But maybe it would be cool for me to understand how that process begins. So if someone's like itching to get in touch with you, or how does it typically start?
So Stephen, we have juicy nuggets. I mean, if you want juicy nuggets, we will provide. I am waiting for you to find a sound on the board.
Have I got a juicy nugget?
for
Well,
that phrase.
okay, I've got the, oh my, I've lost my screen again. So I got the architecture stressing me out one. So that's that one, which is probably me on that. So where's the juicy? Oh, hang on, juice.
Think about it while I answer your question, and then you can punch it at the end.
Okay, I'm thinking.
I would say as we go through the process of meeting a client, I mean, first of all, you're right. It's, we don't give away work for free.
Yes.
But we also understand that a lot of this information is already available. And a lot of what we're telling clients is more career therapy than necessarily us saying, and a lot of the information we've already divulged is here are all the doors that are open to you as an architectural or architecturally educated individual. But this resembles what we do in our intro calls. Is we sit down with someone, we ask about their story. You, for example, are telling us, look, at the time I left, this is how I felt. I understood that, what I really appreciated about work was the personal connections. I would do anything I could to get away from my desk. I really just wanted to be engaging people on a different level. And we take that and we point to specific opportunities. Now, sometimes we get people who are in crisis and there's a little more urgency of how do I handle a situation that's going on at work? Sometimes we're helping people to devise a plan to step away, or they want to go start their own practice. And we're talking to them about how they might continue work for their firm under the guise of a contractor, right? And how you might make that first step out. Sometimes we're talking to them about how they might price that. Or maybe they're immediately already in negotiations for a new role. They already understood the system. They've got a good portfolio. They took a jump out and then they just have no idea what their value is. So we're all across the spectrum there. But I would take this opportunity to plug that one-on-one coaching. I mean, for us, our time is really valuable.
Exactly.
And we charge a $500 base fee to work with clients. So we have that onboarding fee, and that's pretty prohibitive to a lot of architects. I mean, certainly architecture pay is, I think in the UK is almost worse than it is in the US, frankly. But in the US, it is certainly not necessarily always a comfortable, if livable wage. And so we've been trying to problem solve that as how do we make our services accessible to the broadest range of people who need that support. And for a long time, we have also continued to offer discounted rates for people who are unemployed or students or deferred payments or anything we could think of. And it kind of sparked this idea many years ago that there's probably a better, more efficient way to disseminate information than just a one-to-one kind of podcast. And some of those things I think are visible. A lot of career coaches have like a master class online or a series of tutorials or things like that. And certainly we've thought through possibilities, but what really it came down to is there are so many shared experiences and there are so many relatable experiences that we could share. And we decided to do that through the form of a book that we have coming out at the end of the summer here. I think actually probably just the very end of October. So it's called Out of Architecture, The Value of Architects Beyond Traditional Practice.
This is actually a book that is up my street. And so if I'll be very tempted to order physical, but as an international person, are we going to get you? Are you going to be? Are we going to get it on the Kindle, guys?
Yeah, so it's an international publisher, and they will print and ship anywhere in the world. So it's Routledge, who's a UK-based publisher, so you can get your physical copy.
It's actually closer to you than it is to us.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll probably get it. I'll have a confession though. I had like so many architecture books years ago, and like I never read them, so I've given a lot away to students, right? So I'm very, very like picky about. And I live in a 2-bedroom flat in London. There's not much space here, right? So there's not much space. So having all these books. So the only books I've got left now, I've got a few architecture books. I'm going to give more away to students on the Architecture Social but I got loads of video game books and I love them. I'm not going to get rid of them. But out of architecture, it's very close to my, you know, to me personally. So I will buy a book. But before we do that, so you asked me, Jake, you doubled down. You mentioned juicy nuggets. You challenged me. So I got a few noises here. So I've gone to the romance thing. So there's a present here. So let's see what the present sounds like. I never heard it before. Okay. So we open it up.
Okay. So that's like unwrapping a gift.
That's a kiss.
Oh.
So that's it. I think that's a juicy nugget.
There you go. I think that's
that
juicy nuggets.
Very
I think we
juicy.
Did it. Let's give you a round of applause
for me. I'll do
for
it.
finding juicy nuggets.
Oh, that's
well.
funny.
Do you know what? I started getting soundboards and all this stuff because, as well, I think a lot of architecture content can be dry. So I'm going to put that out there publicly on record, and I think having a bit of fun with it really helps. And do you know what? In my job, it's still a pain in the ass sometimes doing these podcasts. Jake, we were talking before about sound and all this stuff, and sometimes it can get a bit much, but I love it. I love learning things. And I tell you what, though, sometimes I look back on those earlier podcasts and I'm just like, because I was going to tell you my confession. I said we'll save it for him. So I loaded up Premiere Pro, right? Because that's the cool thing about architecture, because we can go into Adobe. I'm like, I know this. I don't know this stuff, but I'm like, you know, worked all this stuff out. We've done feathering and blurring and layers and all that stuff. I was like, done Photoshop for years, right? So I'm going to learn Premiere Pro. And so I was doing it and I was all right. But then I had this like preset for a podcast. And what it was doing is it was making the hisses louder for some reason. I'm like, Adobe, why are you doing that in your preset? And it was weird. So I did like 8 months and I manually edited everyone's hisses out. And I was like, this is just like, I can swear because it's my podcast. So I'd just be like, this is it's fucking annoying, right? Oh, I swore after it. Oh, I'm going to have to edit it out. I was like, it's so annoying. And then I realized it's because I had this running setting on. And the way I picked it up, because I was getting my YouTube output on the video, and I was like, there's no hisses there. But on there, you could hear the hisses. So my listeners, I really appreciate you bearing with me on the first year when everything was janky. But do you know what? There's a point where I learned that, apart from one episode where I've hidden because the audio is gone, I'm starting to become okay with things not being perfect. And that can be another thing in architecture school, that, you know, you're making things perfect, you're working those all-nighters. And I genuinely believe that if a content is authentic and it comes from the right place, people are likely much more to engage. And if you have an honest opinion, it's fine. I do agree with what you said, though, Jake, at the start. I mean, the audio's got to sound right. That's like one rule that your dad, bless him, I agree with your dad on that. And tip for anyone who's making a podcast, as long as you sound all right, you're pretty much there. Video is secondary. But yeah, there you go. I love all this stuff. And I wonder if I think I was still in a mainstream architectural practice, I'm not convinced I would be doing it. So for anyone out there who's thinking about exploring this stuff, I mean, what's the best way to start, Erin and Jake? I mean, we talked about your book, which is coming out, which is probably a really good way, a really lower cost of entry to get all that information. You've got the one-to-ones as well. But if people are thinking maybe they're not quite ready for that yet, but they're interested in other stuff, is it a case of you encourage people to start dabbling out of hours and doing their passions if they're not there till midnight in the office working?
I mean, even if you are, right, if you're really passionate about something, architects in general have a tendency to make that happen, right? I think, first of all, this podcast is a really great place to start, right? Like gormandizing content and people who are thinking, you know, similarly to you, but also differently is important. Advice we give a lot of people, and advice I give my students, is just stop hanging out with only other architects. You know, there's a big broad world out there. We post a lot on our social media channels, like you had mentioned, the job posts, but also just sometimes just really words of encouragement or stories what other people are doing. And we do free introductory consults if you want 30 minutes with us, or I can happily and proudly say now members of our team, because we've added on other consultants and coaches. And
yeah,
we're stoked about
that's
that.
a Helen,
yeah,
right?
So Helen's
because I was
to the team.
Shout out to Helen, isn't there?
Huge shout out to Helen. We love Helen. So yeah, I mean, just book some time, and shoot us a note. You know, Jake and I are not shy about the fact that we like to collect people, in the sense of, you know, your network is obviously very helpful to you, but it's also it's super inspiring, and we're here to help and here to listen and offer, as Jake would put it, some unsolicited advice.
I love that, and that's very generous of you as well, isn't it? And I agree with that. You mentioned networks, and I think that another thing that I've learned, especially, it is people who you know, and I think just being out there really helps. I always say to people, whether it's, you know, you're passionate in Rhino, all this stuff, if you go to these events outside of hours, and or as I mentioned before, I like video games, and I was playing with web design, and that got me on my path. And I'm sure Jake and Erin, as you're saying, if these different things really helps. That's my ice cream man outside. I have to edit him outside, isn't it? He just goes around blasting the music.
I want some ice cream.
Did I? Yeah. Was that all right? There's a new version. He's got like, ice cream, come and get your ice cream. I'm like, that doesn't sound right, you know. I'm used to you, like you, the old ice cream tone. I'll come outside later. I'm recording a podcast. Anyways, what was I saying? Talking about experiment and doing all that stuff. I think it's super, super valuable. While the ice cream's going on here and stuff, the other thing I like to do on the podcast is kind of mix it up a bit. And what I was going to say to you guys, and is there any questions that you have for me? I don't tell you this beforehand because I like them to be.
No, I've got one, and I've listened to your podcast, so I know.
It was coming.
I knew this was coming, but I wasn't really prepared. I guess I would be curious to know, when you're supporting, I mean, you recruit for a living, and you recruit for specific firms. Do you ever have, you know, a kind of moral quandary where you feel that you're selling something that you don't believe in?
I did at the start. And the way I solve that is by not taking on roles that I don't believe in. And that's quite harsh at first, because it means I lose more money in theory. But then the other thing I learned is, if you're very honest about the jobs, because you can't just say, I'm going to work on the perfect jobs, but I really like to be very honest with them about the pros and the cons and what suits for different people, because not everyone wants to work for a star architecture practice. And, you know, it actually the website, which is a bit clunky, and you know, they're not the sexy on paper. Well, actually, you can go home at 5:30 at night, and they're quite nice people. And there's a lot of honest companies out there which aren't glamorous. And I think it's all about understanding what the person is looking for. And I think one of the best things I ever learned, which was 2 years ago, and it put into words what I was feeling, because I used to do before, oh, you got to sell all these things here, especially when I started my career, and I was like, oh my God, and then people would turn down say no. What I learned is, you can't really change people's minds. There's a big myth in sales that it's like, I'm going to get you here, Jake, and I'm going to wear you down until you go, oh, go on, sign me up to so-and-so company. And actually, it's not that. It's about finding people, the roles that are right for them. And the bit that I learned to save time is that I go straight away for the no's. So if someone says they're not interested, I'm like, that's fine. That's great. Should I let you know about other stuff? Rather than trying to persuade people all the time. And that saves me a lot of time as well. And also the opposite. And it has a crazy effect on people, where I say, I don't have capacity to take your role on right now. And normally salespeople are like dying to take on roles, and will say, yeah, we can do that and this and that. And I go, I'm too busy right now, or I can't do this, or I'm not the best person for you, or I'm honest about, it's just me. You know, architecture social is just me. And sometimes I occasionally miss people's messages, and rather than saying excuses, I go, sorry, I've overlooked this. And so being ultra honest and going straight for the no's, I think, is really useful. And that helps me out a lot. And while I make less money in one sense, because in theory, right, pushing people into jobs means there's more people going for jobs. Actually, when you push someone into a job, it always goes wrong, right? And it drops out. And so it's a false economy, because I've got the money first, but then I kind of have to refund it anyways. So it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
make sense. And also, I believe as well in when you do good things or you put stuff out there, you start getting, social aggregators, people rate you 4 or 5 stars. And people like to believe, like myself, it's funny because I'm so independent and I research all this stuff. And it's like, I'm very predictable. I will look for services which have 4 stars, 5 stars, and I will go through that and I'll read people reviews and say, I've made an informed decision. And actually, I believe a lot of stock in that. So I think by doing things the right way, that's the right way to do business. So that's my code of conduct. And I think that's the reason why I've survived. But I'm far from perfect. Even this morning, I was thinking about, I haven't got back to some people because you can imagine in recruitment, you get a lot of messages, you get a lot of emails, and I'm aware that I probably let 1 or 2 people down in some places, but I just have to be honest to them when I speak to them. So even I'm learning, and I think my biggest problem is time management. And it's not so much pushing people into jobs, or I don't worry about that anymore because I've done it for enough where it generally works out. I don't know how to describe it. But yeah, sorry, long answer, Jake. But I hope that's useful in some way.
I think it's incredibly insightful. I think we struggle with that too, thinking like, if only we had more time to kind of help more people, or if only we could do, I think it's also, that comes from training too, right? You're trained to kind of open up a set of plans and look for all of the things that you've done wrong, right? And improve upon them.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, the takeaway is that, you're human and the people that you're working with are human. And if everyone just treated everyone more like humans, we would probably be much better off. The best salespeople are humans.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing while we're on it, sales get such a stigma of a word, right? People are like, oh, sales and recruitment. And actually, some of the best, the most successful architects I know are the really good salespeople. Because sales is about conveying ideas, right? And that's partly going marketing, branding, and all this stuff. It's about, relating to someone, sharing their vision. I mean, there's definitely stuff like that in there that I've learned, even like mirroring behaviors and certain things. And, not using jargon's a big thing, because I think like architects, especially when I was in architecture, we had to say, oh, this and this and this jargon. And it's incredibly alienating to other people. And I'm like, don't say jargon, speak in normal languages. And like the kind of theme of this is that it's okay to make mistakes. And I think that there was, I remember I did an internship with a design architect from Skidmore & Merrill. Skidmore & Merrill is a really good company. But you know where I'm going with this pedigree of like, and he was like, American hardcore. And I worked for him for a week. And I remember it was a Friday and Saturday was my birthday. And I bear in mind, this was like an unpaid internship, which is wrong, in my opinion. Unpaid is just terrible anyways. And again, it goes back to like what you're saying of like, why are we working unpaid? It just spreads this like world of problems and pains. But to the point, this person was like, are you coming in tomorrow? And I was like, no, it's my birthday. And I remember this person saying, well, it was my wife's birthday last week and I still came in. And I was thinking, that's like, your business, and your wife. Don't put your problems on me. It's getting a bit sassy now, isn't it? I was like, I ain't coming in, but I didn't come in. And, I agree with you. That attitude's got to go, right? And I think a lot of it comes from in architecture, especially in the UK, is fees being squashed, working long hours, giving away stuff for free, bidding for work for free. I mean, maybe a percentage in a company, but that ideology just doesn't go to me. It doesn't work with me. And it's like, to loop back of what you said about free coaching, you can't do it all the time because you can't give the same value, and free doesn't pay the mortgages. And that's why I say it's like, it's like a gym membership, right? If you pay for it, you're more likely to go. And what I learned is that I did an experiment rant over. But like I did a course where I charged for it and I did a course for free. And I had 12 people turn up to the one that was paid. And I had 2 people turn up to the one that was free. And it was the exact same course. And I believe that it's all about accountability. So when I was saying earlier, juicy nuggets, it's funny because a lot of my juicy nuggets are out there. But when people pay me, they pay me to tell them the juicy nuggets. And I think it's all about accountability. and saying to someone, have you done this in your CV? Because it's out there on my YouTube, but I'm like, have you done it? And I go, oh, no. And that's fine. That's the process. But, you know, that tailored thing, that one-to-one is what people pay for. Yeah. And anyways, I can go on for a rant when it comes to unpaid hours. Jake, what do you...
And we have that we have that same experience, I think, which is people want to be not have their hands held, but they want to actually be coached. And I was I love LinkedIn so much. And I was just on LinkedIn and had seen something. I can't remember, Erin, if this is something that you had shared with me, but it was essentially a TED talk from a doctor, a surgeon, talking about coaching. And it's possible that that my wife had sent this to me, but it was a really astonishing discussion that centered around the fact that, you know, surgeons think they're the best, right? And of course you have to a little bit in, you know, boosting yourself up to not kill someone. But this person decided that what they were going to do is they were going to have someone come in and watch them do surgery, an old kind of either mentor or colleague, and just provide external feedback. And I think what's so incredible is we have such a difficult time doing these things for ourselves. Even me, I have the most difficult time negotiating for myself, but I can negotiate for a client no problem because I get to see both sides of the equation clearly with no bias. And I think that's one of the things that people do pay for. I would also say that back to your sales comment, this is sort of the early stage of the rant, so I'm not sure if the listeners will remember.
You'll be like, oh,
but
it was a long one.
But the sales portion, I think, is also really accurate, and one of the benefits of being at this kind of later stage in the foundation of Erin and I's business is that we can tell people, first of all, we're not the right people to help you. And we have the luxury of doing that because we both have separate professional endeavors that really carry us. And that's a luxury that not a lot of people have. But it's also interesting because we learn a lot about people when we offer them advice, and as Erin put, sometimes unsolicited or free. And we will kind of immediately know whether a client is right for us, because the ones that aren't go, well, tell me, like, you know, what is the payment structure here? Like, what is the process? Like, what do I owe you? And there's a real hesitancy to just get into a genuine conversation. And I think those are the clients that end up having wildly different expectations of the exchange of money for coaching and money for advice. And what I would encourage those people to think about is, you know, when you go to a therapist, you're not paying that person to solve your problems. You're paying that person to listen and give you insight into your own way of thinking. And to tell you things that you probably already know, but that you might need to hear sort of read back to you. And that's one of the huge benefits of having a career coach is, you know, you're more valuable. You're coming to us because you have already identified that problem. You know that you want more appreciation, or you need a better balance, or you're scared of something or anxious. We're just reading that back to you and telling you some ways that you might be able to escape from that. And I think that's a hugely powerful thing that can't necessarily always be replicated in a one-to-many sense. So that's why we still, you know, we will always value those one-on-one conversations.
Love it. Brilliant. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you. I think that actually you have to be prepared to invest in yourself. And that was one thing that one of my tutors said when I was younger, and I disagreed because I think I was broke at the time. So I do understand if you haven't got some money per se, but the moment you've got a little bit of money, actually investing in yourself makes a big difference. And I think that I've started to learn that, and I invest whenever I can in, at the moment, it's like business coaches or even sales coaches, or sometimes I try not to do sales, but you can learn a lot of stuff as well, like even audio books. And it's such a great way to get into this stuff, isn't it? Psychology. Don't buy a book about sales, buy a book about psychology. And I think that's really interesting. So I advise a lot of that stuff, but I do think if anyone's thinking of going outside of architecture, in one sense, I could be a precedent, but why not aim for the stars, design awesome shoes, or, you know, be part of a rock band and do awesome community, like, you know, projects in the day as well. So on that basis, because I love this, and we're look at this, it's almost professional. We're at the 1 hour mark. Of course that was intended. But perhaps Jake and Erin, you can tell us where people can find you and how
The easiest
they
way to
can
find
reach
us
out.
is outofarchitecture.com. Instagram, Out of Architecture. Come out and connect with us on LinkedIn, Jake Rudin and Erin Pellegrino. As Jake mentioned, he absolutely loves LinkedIn. So just come find us and connect with us. And let's have a conversation if you need to have a conversation.
Brilliant. I agree. LinkedIn all the way. Instagram, I'm losing the will to live. I need to make some reels. That could be a topic for another day. Thank you so much, Jake. You've been an absolute star. So, and I'll do a real applause. And Erin as well. Keep it up. And yeah, we need a bit more punk in the world as well. So thank you both, Out of Architecture, everyone that's joined us today. If you're rendering and you've been listening to this on audio and anything's resonated, then you definitely should reach out. But if you are in architecture as well and you have a passion for it, but perhaps you know someone that maybe is struggling, or you think that, you know, they've got super cool talents that could be used elsewhere, why not share this with them as well? Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to end the podcast now and listen to one next week if I upload it on time. I hope I will, and I will. Time management, we'll get there. Thank you all. Gotta go. Bye. Take care.